Healthy congregations help people in numerous ways. There are so many stories today about churches in decline, and I think that decline is directly related to religious institutions getting out of touch with the real needs of people. If there were not such a thing as a religious community or a church, it would have to be invented in our society, because there are certain needs about the human being that must be addressed for life to be healthy for individuals and for groups. Recently, I spoke about how congregations can help support individuals clarify what they believe, what their principles are, and what their purposes are. A very important thing. Social action and charitable actions can be generated out of congregations by collective action, by people coming together, as this congregation does all the time. That is yet another important purpose. And yet another important purpose is to provide community. Real community, authentic community that builds relationships between people that are healing and joyous and not exploitive and manipulative. Creating meaningful, positive, respectful relationships is no trivial issue. And to justify that assertion, I will mention something I have mentioned before, but I do so now with a little more detail. Dr. Julian Holt Lundstad is a professor of psychology and neuroscience at Brigham Young University. She examined 148 studies representing 300,000 patients to determine the factors that lead to early death. These studies provided data regarding diet, exercise, and habits like smoking and drinking and other behaviors that impact health. These studies also provided data regarding the type and frequency of social activities, the degree of involvement of the persons with friends and the larger community, and the degree to which people felt lonely or isolated. And what Dr. Holt Lundstad discovered was that the best predictors of survival was whether or not a person scored high on social support, that is, whether they had a system around them of relationships which supported them, and how well the person was integrated into those communities of support available to them. Scoring high in these two ways increased the odds of survival by as much as 50%, especially after a heart attack or a stroke. And only giving up smoking had anywhere near the same level of a positive health benefit. Isn't that remarkable? A study released in 2017 by the insurance giant Cigna found that loneliness is as harmful to one's health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Now, I cannot attest to the veracity of these studies, but they came from legitimate sources, but it is symbolic of the impact of loneliness on human beings. The feeling of loneliness is rooted in our evolutionary history and signals to us that being alone is dangerous, which during our long evolutionary history was surely the case. Fear makes us aware of potential dangers. Physical pain signals to us that something is wrong with our bodies and what is happening to us. And social pain, also known as loneliness, evolved to protect us from the danger of remaining isolated. The experience of loneliness provokes us to pay more attention to our social connections, to be willing to reach out to others, and to even perhaps renewed frayed or broken bonds. But a problem occurs if, in response to loneliness, we do not seek out the cure for loneliness, namely closer connection to others, or if our attempts to do so are in some way ineffective or flawed. It appears that for many people in our society, this effort to move back out of loneliness towards a closer connection to others is very difficult. Loneliness has become a problem which affects many people. A study published in 2018 in the journal International Psychogeriatrics, based on researchers from the University of California in San Diego, stated that 3/4 of Americans experience moderate or high degree of loneliness. Why is loneliness so prevalent? I'd like us to consider the internal situational, and external factors contributing, I believe, to loneliness. First, there is the internal mechanism that draws us to loneliness. Feelings of loneliness are part of the human condition because each of us in our hearts know that it is extraordinarily difficult to find another person, even those closest to us, who really, deeply, truly understands us. And so for that and for many other reasons, it is easy and it is an inevitable part of the human condition to feel lonely at times. However, if the spell of loneliness is unrelieved, it can begin to be interpreted as something is wrong. Something is wrong with me. And the perfectly normal fear of negative responses from others can become excessive, driving us towards becoming more defensive and cautious and pushing us yet further towards isolation. Additionally, our ability to assess others' anticipated response to us can get distorted. Our perception of other people's mental states and the narratives we wrap around that assumption can easily be distorted by the pain of isolation and loneliness. And it is this dual influence of becoming more defensive and cautious on the one hand, and also more likely to misconstrue and misinterpret how others perceive us, that can drive us yet further into isolation. And as fear, cautiousness, and suspicion cloud our thinking, our ability to utilize our skills to connect with others are diminished. And this process can take on a life of its own. And I have seen it happen before my very eyes with many people I have known in and out of congregations. And so, in an effort to protect themselves against disappointment and the pain of rejection that becomes ever more acute as people go into loneliness, the lonely can come up with an infinite number of reasonable reasons why a particular effort to reach out to others will be pointless, or why a particular relationship will not work, or why it is better to just be alone and never get hurt. And if and when our negative social expectations elicit behaviors from others that validate our fears, then the energy and power of isolation grows yet stronger. Amen. This series of reactions can lead us, and I appreciate the amen, whoever did that. This series of reactions can lead us down in a downward spiral toward greater isolation and loneliness, which can become a self-reinforcing loop of doom. And I have seen it before my very eyes evolve over weeks or months and sometimes years. This is the internal process of vulnerability to loneliness. Now consider the situational vulnerabilities that create loneliness. There are people who get fed up with other people and think the greatest thing that could happen to them is to go live in some remote place on the mountains or far away, or maybe another country where they don't have to deal with the people that they don't want to deal with anymore. And it feels great for 3 weeks. And then it doesn't feel great anymore. There are people who do that just physically with their lives. There are people who carry a burden that they're frightened to tell another person, who don't want to share. And because of the associated guilt, they are driven to isolation. There are people who have a medical or a family situation which embarrasses them or gives them a sense of shame, which drives them even further into isolation. I have known people, and it's been among the most heartbreaking experiences of my life. I have known people who've had chronic illness, terminal illness such as cancer, and other people shun them. And they were uncomfortable being around other people because they were dying. And one of these people said to me once, "Ed, this is the most lonely life you can imagine that I'm living." I remember a woman who had 2 young children, 12 and 6, and she had terminal cancer. And everybody in her family, her husband, her mother, her own father, and her mother-in-law would never talk about what was really happening in her life because they were terrified. So she was isolated. There are many people like that. There are people who have experiences of being abused by other human beings, of being exploited by other human beings, which created tremendous distrust toward other human beings, and that too drives people into isolation. There are also personality factors. Some people are introverts and love being alone. And it's a great thing, but it places them at greater vulnerability during certain times when the joy of being alone wears thin. And then finally, there's a situation of being a man. If you are a man in our society, you are vulnerable to loneliness. Because men do not know, except for those present here, of course. Men generally have spent their entire lives seeing other men as competitors before whom they must never let their guard down. And I've seen it through all the years of my life as a minister, how maladroit men are in building some kind of relationship with other men. These are some of the situational causes of loneliness. Now consider, finally, the external causes of loneliness. Modern society, we do not need to be reminded, is fragmented. Not a week goes by when somebody doesn't tell me some form of, I can no longer talk to my closest relatives or go to a family gathering of any kind because of TRUMP. And associated issues. I spelled it out because it's a dirty word. And I don't want to use vulgarity in the pulpit. Our society has become polarized to the point of dehumanization. We recently saw, once again, this eruption of dehumanization in our society. Tyree Nichols was murdered recently in a brutal way by representatives of the police in Memphis. Yet again, we try to absorb the hard truth that our law enforcement organizations in this country seemed programmed to treat citizens, especially citizens of color and the marginalized, like enemies in a time of war. What sickness, what madness has taken hold in this country so that something like this can happen yet once again? Brutalization and dehumanization erupting from the very hands of those meant to ensure our safety. This is our context, this atmosphere of divisiveness, dehumanization in which we live and move. And this external social force breeds severe distrust, polarization, sows seed of hatred, and drives people more and more and more to recoil from seeking connection to others. These three forces, the internal, the situational, and the external, have, I believe, created a condition that makes isolation and loneliness a formidable force in our society today. In the face of this, we must forge communities of vital connection. How do we respond to the challenges of loneliness? Well, first, attend the fellowship every Sunday without fail. Go to social activities, as many, many did Friday night at the chili cook-off. There are some people that really like chili here. I like that. Get involved. Overcome your proclivity to be suspicious. And hold back. And get engaged. It is good for your health and well-being. Say that to yourself over and over again. This is a major ministry of this congregation, is to provide a safe place where people can befriend and care for one another in an atmosphere of safety and non-exploitation. We have specialized ministries in this congregation, such as the lay ministry team, which specifically addresses the needs of people who are most vulnerable to isolation. The second thing to do is to memorize the fellowship's new covenant, because that gives you a roadmap into understanding what creates solid relationships. Third, and this is going to be wildly controversial, I fear, connect with as many of your relatives as you possibly can. Go to as many important nodal events as possible, i.e., weddings, funerals, anniversaries, etc., as you possibly can. Family connection is problematic to some people to some extent, and difficult for some people to an extraordinary degree. Avoid the problematic ones and connect with the unproblematic ones. There are many, many more people in your family tree than you can ever believe are there. Higher levels of contact with members of one's extended family, especially close members of one's extended family, lowers rates of illness. That has been proven by study after study. But more significantly, perhaps, higher levels of connection with extended family have a positive impact on the life trajectories of children. The more your children, I'm talking to parents, can connect with as wide a range of extended family as possible, the better that child's life trajectory will be. These are some ways to move against loneliness in our lives and to help others as well. People need supportive, affirming, caring, non-harming, non-exploitive connections to other human beings. We all can slip in and out of loneliness. Feeling lonely at any particular moment means that you are human. There is nothing wrong with that. But we don't want to become prisoners of isolation. Social connection is not a popularity contest. It is not the quantity, but the quality of relationships. It is very difficult to have more than 3 close friends, including one spouse. But it is possible to have layers of friends, up to 150 people, and these weaker bonded friendships are as important as the 2 to 3 close friendship circles. It is important to remember that even the best friends and marriages and relationship partners will always inevitably go into cycles or periods of disagreement and even hurt one another from time to time. The secret to success in the face of this reality is not to magnify the moments of dysfunction and friction, but to maximize the points of connection. Sociologists Nick Christakis and James Fowler, while they were both at Harvard, used data from the famous Framingham Heart Study, a longitudinal study over many decades that involved a community of nearly 12,000 people from the early 1970s to 2003. And what they found, or one of their conclusions, was that a person's chances of becoming happy and contented or depressed, and even the likelihood of giving up smoking, was correlated with similar changes in one's closest friendship circle. The point is, people around us affect us, and we affect those people around us, sometimes in very profound ways. May we all be aware of the importance of relationships, the importance of the quality of our relationships for our health and well-being, for ourselves as individuals, and for the congregation.